welcome to the Middlesex University's North London Story Festival 2022. So my name is Klaudia Staszewska and I'm a third year student on the BA English program. I'm delighted to welcome a business person, author and researcher, Gabriel Wisdom, as well as Kadisha Kaur-Singh of the organization called ERIC, an employment service for young creatives. So hello, Gabriel and Kadisha. Hi. So I'll be your interviewer today, and if the audience has any questions throughout the debate, you can just pop it into the chat. So yeah, let's begin. The first question. So how and why is storytelling important in business? And can you give any examples? Maybe let's start with Kadisha.
Sure. So without storytelling, I truly believe there wouldn't be a marketing industry. And without a marketing industry, let's be serious, no one would really be swayed to buy anything. I think for me, a big example of this is Christmas time, where all the adverts on TV that use usually like the fantasy genre to tell stories to get us to buy things, it's how I pick presents for my family. Yeah.
Gabriel?
Well, I completely agree with Kadisha. Stories connect people, stories sell, stories make facts easier to recall, and they're very good motivators in business. For example, I remember years ago when I started in the securities industry as a bond salesman for the late great Lehman Brothers. I had to call on people I'd never talked to sell them, municipalities and individuals, bonds. And the manager told me the story of the cat and mouse, an Aesop's fable, about how the mice were petrified of the cat in the house. They had a meeting. What are we going to do? We got to figure out a way to protect ourselves from the cat. The young mouse says, hey, why don't we hang a bell around the cat's neck, and then we'll know when he's coming. They all thought that was a glorious idea. And an old mouse said, well, who's going to put the bell around the cat? And it was a story about courage. Somebody's got to go and get the customer. Without that, there's no business. But it's hard. It takes guts, it takes courage. So I thought that was an interesting example of using a story to motivate employees to get some business.
Oh, that's really interesting. Kadisha, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think in terms of storytelling in business, it just keeps most businesses alive. So last Christmas, there's one example. I don't know if you guys saw the M&S Christmas advert where the Christmas fairy drops her wand and brings Percy Pig alive. That advert alone, like my sister's 8 years old, and that advert alone made her like love Christmas. I felt like at her age before it was dying, but those creative stories brought it back for her. So yeah,
thank you. So how does the business world inform, inspire, maybe limit or generally affect the particular shape or style of your stories, of your writing?
oh, should I go?
Yeah, Kadisha.
Okay, so for me, I feel like the business world really has an impact in the romance genre specifically, and there's a reason why. I feel like recently, from 2013 upwards, the male love interest is always played by this very like sterile business owner. I think like 50 Shades of Grey is a great example of that. And then the female love interest is always played by this really creative person. So again, 50 Shades of Grey relates to that as well, where the female love interest, she likes books, she reads books, she works for a publishing company. And I feel like the whole business aspect, especially now, is such a predominant thing in romance, where 50 Shades of Grey set off and it just continued and continued. With now, it's like the main thing in loads of K-dramas, especially on Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, well, first of all, a business is usually about measuring and the target audience. They're finding what they want to buy, what motivates them. It's generally, stories are generally not about the company, they're about the customer. And they're in the Harvard Business Review, there was an article recently written by a psychologist about how in any group, roughly 40% will be auditory learners. They learn best by listening to the words and listening to lectures. 40% will be visual learners. They like mental pictures, or they like to see things, and 20%, pardon me, are kinesthetic learners. They remember the emotional connections of a story. Well, good business stories include all those elements. So to your question, how does the business world inform, inspire, limit, or generally affect a particular shape or style of stories? I'd say they use some science, some art, combination of things to influence the target audience.
Thank you for that. And which companies would you say are particularly good at storytelling, and why? I think we kind of came on to that with the Marks and Spencer's kind of ad. So yeah, do you want to add anything on that, Gabriel or Kadisha?
So for me, Marks and Spencer's, yeah, that's definitely a big one. I think that always comes to mind. But I think the other thing that comes to mind is Argos. I don't know if you guys remember when Argos did the story about the alien family. But that is always something that sticks in my head when it comes to storytelling and businesses. There's that, and Nike. I don't know if anyone has seen the How to Be a Londoner advert for Nike, where it tells the story of different people living in London and how their life goes. And that one always sticks. I think especially now, Nike has become this really luxury brand that most people can't afford. And that story kind of brought it back to the fact that Nike is for working class people. That advert really pushed that forward. So those are the three companies that really come to mind when I think about who's just great at storytelling.
All right, Gabriel?
Well, there are a lot of examples, but a really good one, I think, is Land Rover. On their 70th anniversary, they came up with a campaign called The Land of the Land Rovers. And they had images of Himalayans in old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old Land Rovers navigating these rough, unpaved roads through villages, and and it was about the dependability and the ruggedness of the Land Rover. And then they flash forward to the modern Land Rover driver, and of course, they're going to get the grocery store, they're bringing the kids to school, but it's more of a state of mind. They never go off-road. They're on paved roads, but it's a Land Rover feeling. You're entering another world just by purchasing a Land Rover. And I thought that was a very powerful story.
Yeah, that's really interesting. To think, cars and stuff, but everything is a story, really.
Yeah.
So are there any genres or style which dominates in stories, and what place do horror and romance take, for instance?
Okay. So for me, I feel like horror and romance are actually two of the biggest genres that companies use based on the time of the year. So when it's Valentine's Day, every advert that you see is completely romance based. I think one example of that is the M&M adverts that came out recently this year for Valentine's Day, where it's the green M&M trying to seduce the red M&M and all of that. Yeah, there probably could have been a better example. I think a better example of romance that stays throughout like the whole year, not just Valentine's Day, is perfume adverts. But horror is always predominant when it's Halloween. So last year Fanta had these horror adverts where basically they were scaring customers in store. That one always comes to mind. And Christmas time, whenever it's Christmas, all businesses use the fantasy genre to push like their whatever products they're selling at the time. I'm going to keep going back to Marks and Spencer's because they are really just the best example of this. I do love the Marks and Spencer's adverts so much. Where last year was the Christmas fairy. I personally, at any other time of the year, haven't seen fantasy used in an advert unless it's Christmas time. But yeah, I would say that there is businesses do use romance and horror as their main genres throughout the year. It gets a rise. I mean, whilst we don't really see the adverts as scary when it's horror, it is funny. Yeah.
Thank you, Kadisha. Gabriel, do you want to add on that?
Yes. Well, that's so true about horror. It can also be shocking, and therefore it is memorable. For example, there was an anti-smoking campaign that ran for years. It still runs periodically, where somebody is speaking through a voice box or a hole in their neck about the dangers of smoking. An environmental group is running a campaign about plastics in the ocean, which a seal has plastic over its face. And I mean, these are horrific images, but they're very effective. On the romance front, I agree. It's you find that very frequently in advertising because it feels good. We're all drawn to that. It's kind of a back to origin story. Apple, for example, when Steve Jobs was fired, the company almost went into bankruptcy. He was called back, and he reignited the fire, the old Apple DNA, and they began the Think Different campaign and started innovating and bringing in new products. And of course, Apple is the dominant company today. Everybody loves a comeback story, but it was also a romantic. There was a romantic element in the Apple comeback.
So would you say that when horror is used in adverts, it's used to like push real life traumas?
I think so. Yeah, it's memorable. It can be comedic as well, like you mentioned, Kadisha, during Halloween. You know, it's funny, but it's also it's very emotional, and you don't forget these horrific images of, let's say, the pelicans or other birds caught in the tar due to an oil spill, this sort of thing. So horror is very effective.
Yeah, that reminds me, I don't know if you guys seen it, but when you're in primary school, they show you the advert of The Boy Who Crossed the Road, the cartoon, because that really comes to mind. It's about the boy who crossed the road and he was wearing dark clothes and he ended up getting hit by the car. And yeah, he's like all gruesome and bad. And yeah, that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, I agree. Horror is very popular, especially at the time of the Halloween type of. What are the main ways companies use to develop their stories? And do they employ professional storytellers or do they use customers perhaps?
So in my case, my job as a copywriter is to develop these stories, but no one would exactly call me a creative writer in my job or like a story developer. My job is to take what like the standard things a company does and enhance it to make it interesting. So I would say it's the marketing team and the copywriters that, you know, see what's trending in the world and they flip it into a story to sell it on, to tell the world that this is why you should be interested in our products. But yeah, I don't think they go out of their way to hire story developers or writers specifically. It really is just the marketing team or copywriters.
Great, thank you so much. And Gabriel?
Well, Airbnb is, I think, very good at engaging the customer. They don't run advertisements about Airbnb. They let the customers tell their stories. They even have a YouTube channel, and it's been extremely effective. The company has been, growing at a very rapid pace for years now. One example that I was reading about recently was they featured a woman in her late 30s who had lost her job in New York City, but she happened to own her apartment. And because of Airbnb, she found Airbnb, and she was able to rent the apartment for a lot of money to different guests who wanted to visit New York City and fulfill her lifelong dream of traveling. She felt that with the additional revenue from Airbnb, from her condo or apartment, she was able to fulfill a dream. So Airbnb had done this for her. Another example with Airbnb was before Halloween. They launched a campaign showing that 9,000 of their customers had stayed in houses that were purportedly haunted. And sure enough, that Halloween, everybody was looking for a haunted house to stay in with their friends, and that drove business much higher for Airbnb that season. Powerful story.
That is brilliant. I actually saw that on Instagram. Sorry, Adam just asked, is there anything trending in the world that you wouldn't flip as a copywriter? Yes, actually, recently there was a company I was working for. They wanted me to journal the whole process into creating digital art. But the problem with that is that there was a lot of backlash because the digital art they was creating had a massive impact on the environment. I don't know if you guys know about NFTs, but they are really bad for the environment. And I had to kind of push that we need to comment on it. We need to talk about it because you can't just make these NFTs and expect people not to say anything about it. But I was told to spin it and kind of make it seem like, oh, well, whilst we're not doing good here, we are doing good in other places. And I refused to do it because, I mean, you are right. You can't turn everything into this fun little story when there genuinely are ethical issues behind it. So yeah, in that sense, it's either that there's not a lot of options for companies in that scenario. It's either you come out, you tell the truth, you be honest about it, or you could do what I was asked to do, which was, put the focus elsewhere.
Yeah, and just to ask, are either of you creative writers, and are you currently working on any piece of writing? Maybe Gabriel, do you want to say?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm writing a novel that's an eco thriller. It's actually speculative fiction. It's a what if, what if certain things were to occur that could actually happen, that are based on well-researched historical events and facts, and then the story has it's not such a happy ending, but it's a moral message. And I'm working on a very short story right now about that has a horror element and environmental about how a biologist discovers an ancient virus in the melting permafrost in Antarctica and becomes infected by this. And the result is that that the virus has been dormant for centuries. And what happens is that as the virus spreads, people find it difficult to sleep because their old cellular memories bring back times when we were arboreal creatures living in trees or caves. And so changes society. Those are two creative projects I'm working on.
That sounds really, really interesting and great. What about you, Kadisha? Are you working on anything right now?
Yes, me and my best friend have decided to try our hand at script writing. So for the past couple of years, I have been complaining about how Disney needs fresh ideas. I'm really tired of seeing Sleeping Beauty and blah, blah, blah. Yes, we have Moana, but I need new things. So what we want to do, we want to rewrite like a horrorish version of the Caribbean folklore Anansi. Where I don't know if you guys know anything about Anansi, but in the Caribbean, when you're told stories about him, they're really fun, they're really playful. He's a lot like Loki, the god of mischief. But in Africa, there's a complete different spin on him where he's actually quite a dark deity that they're like scared of. So it's something that me and my best friend want to turn into like a fun story, and we don't know what we want to do with it yet. But yeah. But yeah, that's what we're working on right now. Honestly, it's really early stages. It's just something that we was complaining about during lockdown and we're putting into motion now. But yeah, outside of work, that's what I do.
You know, anything can become something great, so I'm rooting for you. And you know, you put questions into the chat. So you were directing them at Gabriel, perhaps, or was it just overall? Oh no, sorry, that was, I think, Celine who put that. So that was, yeah. So should I just, do you want me to ask? So how do you tell your stories and your starting point, what it is, and what do you get inspired from? Maybe let's start with Kadisha. So you kind of went on to that, but maybe you can tell us what kind of, so what's your starting point and how you get inspired to do things, and like, do you just go on writing something or do you just plan, or?
So my starting point is actually quite pessimistic. I always look at what we don't have. So going back to the whole Tim Burton thing, growing up, I really loved Tim Burton, but I got really sick of not seeing me represented in any of his things. That's when I sat there and I was like, well, if he's not going to do it, then I can do it myself. So I got inspired by that. And then what brings that inspiration even more is that I start talking to my best friend about it, and she fuels it with more ideas. And then it just turns to like this writing session where we write whatever's on our mind. We revisit it in, I think, 3 days. That's like our rule of thumb, 3 days, and see, okay, what were we just ranting about, or what can we actually turn into a story? And then we start developing it into a script. I don't really think like I'm great at writing short stories, but I am good at writing scripts. So that's what I get inspired by. That's how I start.
Okay, so about you, Gabriel, what's your starting point? Do you sit and write, or do you have to think about everything first?
Well, I try to find true stories that I can embellish and fictionalize. And what I find most of the time is that, you know, as the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. And that does happen. So that leads me to the what if scenario. What if things had ended differently? Or what if things were to go perfectly? The what if scenario of speculative fiction. You know, what if, on the business front, what if everyone in the world loved what we offer, our products and services? What would that look like? How would we handle it? If we were 1,000 times bigger, what would we do? These are what Walt Disney used to call Imagineering, just engineering your future reality. So I like to do that as a writer, and it's a lot of fun. You know, how are you going to change your world realistically? Because a good story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, has to be believable. Had to have verisimilitude, the writer's word. So that's what I try to do. That's how I start.
Okay, that's a really interesting approach. What do you think, maybe, Gabriel? Are you drawn to any specific genre of writing? Do you keep like kind of seeing things in a specific way, or do you like exploring with different genres and just see how it goes?
Well, I've always liked historical fiction. And I like to be educated while I'm entertained. So I found Clive Cussler, for example. I liked Ian Fleming a lot. I really have read everything that Michael Crichton has ever written, including under former names. I like the fact that he generally backs up his stories with the research. He shows you in an afterword how he came to write the story. It includes a bibliography. So I'm trying to do that in my work as well.
Thank you very much. Kadisha, what about you?
So if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said fantasy until Adam destroyed that for me. But now I've been reading a lot of whodunits and murder mysteries. So recently I read a book called How to Kill Your Family, which was really interesting. It kind of just follows the path of this girl who's in prison and she's talking about a murder she committed, but it's not who you thought it was. And that's what the story starts with. So I've been reading that.
That's great. Yeah, he does get into your mind, Adam. So yeah, I actually am doing crime right now as well. He kind of convinced me. So does your professional work inform or help your creative writing in some ways? Gabriel, do you want to start?
Say the question again.
So does your professional work
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know which one we're on about. So does your professional work inform or help your creative writing in any ways?
Well, I draw a lot of examples from my professional, and personal world. I like flying airplanes, for example. So all my stories seem to have, an airplane and a pilot and something dramatic that occurs, some adventure, an adventure element. In business, I like business. I like numbers. I enjoy success stories in the area of finance, particularly because I understand it, I think. So my stories will generally involve a character or characters who've had outsized success in some financial activity, and then decided to have a second act. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously said, "There are no second acts." Well, he was wrong. It's a colorful thing to have written years ago, but there are a lot of second acts. People reinvent themselves all the time. So that fascinates me.
Well, that's great. Kadisha, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think my job as copywriting definitely helps with my creative writing, because my whole role is to persuade people to do something, whether that's to buy something, whether that's to click a link. And the way I see it is I'm writing short little stories of descriptions to get people to do that. And if I can incorporate that level of persuasion in my creative writing, it influenced me a lot.
Thank you. And do you know other business people who are creative writers as well, in your kind of, business world, everyday kind of, life? Kadisha, do you want to start?
So I actually thought about this question for a while. No, I actually don't. Here's the thing. So when I work at Eric, it's literally a team of 4, so it's really small. You've got the CEOs who do CEO things, and then you've got the tech guy who does tech things, and then it's just me on my marketing team. And then when I work for my other company, the marketing team is massive, but no one really focuses on the creative writing aspect. And if I would ask my coworkers, "Hey, do you guys take up any creative, hobby outside?" Not really. Yeah, I mean, as far as I've been working, it really has just been me.
Well, then it kind of makes you special. So that's good. That's good. What about you, Gabriel?
I don't know any business people who are creative writers, but I know of business people who write creatively. Maybe the most famous would be Warren Buffett, who lives in Omaha here in the United States. He writes an annual shareholders letter, and it's very creative, very funny, has a lot of stories. And he's talking about his collection of hundreds of different businesses that make up Berkshire Hathaway. And he's sort of a modern day Aesop. His little stories have, they're fables, they're of sorts. And he explains why he only does business with people he likes.
Well, and so how would like a person get a job as a company storyteller? And is that even a thing, in companies and business? And, Kadisha, do you want to start?
Oh yeah, that's definitely a thing. It really is just disguised. Well, it depends on what industry you work in, but for most businesses, it's disguised as marketing. Like the role of marketing is to create stories, to persuade people to engage with whatever the company's putting out. I would tell them to look into copywriting, and if they're interested in film, and I think a lot of people forget about this actually. It was a conversation I was having recently at Eric. We was talking to secondary school kids and we asked them, oh, what do you think you could do with film? And story development wasn't one of them. As far as they were concerned, it was just acting. A lot of people forget that in everything that's entertaining, you need a story. So you could work in TV, you could work in film, the list is endless. Yeah.
Yeah, I do agree. Yeah. What about you, Gabriel?
I agree also with Kadisha. And Adam was telling me just before the broadcast here that he's heard that a lot of businesses are hiring from the humanities now. And that's true here in the United States as well, because getting and keeping customers is the lifeblood of any business. If you're a doctor, you need to keep patients. You need to attract them and you have to keep them. If you're a technology company, same thing. If you're Google, you can't just come out and say, hey, we're an advertising agency, which is basically what they are. We're going to help you. We help you find whatever you want. That's what we do. And we advertise to you as well. We're going to use you. But I think today it comes down to emotional intelligence, not just IQ. How are you in engaging and keeping customers? How are you dealing with the public and being the face of the organization, a face and a member, team member?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Everything is a story. Every person is a different story. So just a question from me, maybe. So how long have you been kind of interested in creative writing, and kind of how did you manage to think of like, oh, maybe let's write something, let's explore that kind of creative side of yourself? Gabriel, maybe you want to start?
Well, I started out in the entertainment industry as a radio disc jockey back when FM was just becoming a new medium. There weren't even FM radios in cars. They were all AM. And when I started, it was just FM and rock and roll alternative music, what is today known as classic rock. When I was a disc jockey, all the artists were alive. And of course, it was the British invasion. Then we had the San Francisco, underground thing happening, and it was a renaissance of music. But to get FM radios into cars, we partnered with stereo stores. And as a loss leader, they provided FM radio converters for almost nothing. And the stores had blocks and blocks of people lined up to get their FM converters. And that was a very exciting, it was a story. basically, and it was a very exciting time. So I got my start in a creative industry, and then as I got older, I had a chance to go into the securities industry and become a bond salesman. That's how I began. Bonds, James Bonds.
And do you think you're better at selling bonds than others because of your creative narrative skills?
I do. Yeah. In fact, I advertised on radio, and it didn't make the phone ring, but it helped the public that I was dealing with think of me differently than the guy that gets up on stage and says, "All right, here they are, Led Zeppelin." It was a big change. When I started selling bonds, my customers said to me, my son or my daughter says, you're a disc jockey. How do you know what you're doing? So I had to reinvent myself. Of course, I did know what I was doing. I was with a large company. That's how I learned. But engaging customers and keeping customers is what it's about. And stories are powerful. We all know that.
Yeah, they move us more emotionally than, oh, look at the quality of this product. You're like, whatever. But if you have that emotional complex around it, it's more persuasive and engaging.
There's no question about it.
But we see American narratives as quite cynical and manipulative. we do. And we kind of, but the American audience seems quite comfortable with that quite direct narrative form that you guys use, whereas our narratives are a bit fluffier and a bit more indirect. But I don't know if.
Well, I'm not. I understand, why you might have that view. I mean, we had a president who. I mean, we've all got our opinions about Donald Trump, but we elected someone with no background in politics or running a government organization to be president of the United States. And I don't think that helped our reputation. But many American companies do understand that it's about leveraging the power of great storytelling, not, me, and the bottom line. Nike, the sneaker company, for example, they've run numerous documentaries on great basketball players, and Michael Jordan, for example, when he retired, and you didn't see the little, Nike emblem until the very end of the documentary.
But again, we see that as quite a cynical color washing of a product. We really do. But I'll hand over to Kadisha, because Kadisha's probably more qualified to respond on that.
Well, on the whole, how we consider Americans to be quite cynical.
But I mean, they're shameless. They're shameless with their direct story.
I agree with that. It is quite like, look how lovely Michael Jordan was, and look at his life, but Nike, go and buy trainers. It is a bit cynical. However, we do that here as well, and the same example is Nike. It's the example that I used before. As much as I love the How to Be a Londoner advert by Nike, it really is this story of random Londoners talking about their struggle. You're like, I can really connect to that, but at the end it's buy our new Air Forces. We do. I don't think it's just an American thing. I think it's just a marketing thing. Whatever it takes to appeal to an audience, that really is it.
Thank you, Kadisha.
Sorry, I got all animated and enthusiastic. That's why I interrupted. Sorry about that, Claudia.
I do have one example
That's okay.
of where that wouldn't be true, where the cynicism is undeserved. I mean, we should be skeptical of everything we see and hear, especially if it's in the context of an advertisement. Absolutely. But D.B. Dalton, the bookstore that was acquired by Barnes and Noble a number of years ago, they did they did a campaign where somebody walks into the store looking for a book, and the service person can't find the books. And then she finds that it's in the back room, but it's all boxed up. So she calls the competition. She calls Borders Bookstore and finds that they have the book. And so she tells the customer, you go to Borders and here are the directions to go to Borders, just helping the customer. That created a lot of goodwill for Barnes and Noble and Dalton. So, I mean, yeah, you could be, what's the ulterior motive? Build goodwill, build trust. But isn't that what every politician does as well? I mean, you hear politicians talk about, you know, the poor people that that needed help, and they came to, you know, and I talked to so-and-so, and they told me about what the problem in this community, and so here's what we're doing. Human nature.
Yeah, I think so. Interestingly, Ezra in the chat has said that it's very American and British to be quite cynical and manipulative in our marketing stories from a German point of view.
There you go.
So
we love German products, especially the cars.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm sorry, but for us, all of the adverts here and in America, it's all sugar-coated, fluffy, and very, very cynical. While we in Germany are absolutely straight honest and dead on, which puts a lot of people in the UK and in the US off. Where I was just typing my next question in, when we're looking at the cultural differences in that. Do you have any advice for me? I'm an MA novel writing student, on what to absolutely avoid in my novel to get it read in the UK and the US? Because again, as German, I'm just straight on it. That's how it is. I don't do polite, I just do honest.
Gabriel, this is for you.
I'll take a stab at that. I think it's okay to be straight on it. You don't want your reader to be confused or frustrated because they don't get it. At the same time, it's got to engage them. They've got to feel the emotion. They have to care. Why should I care? That's the question you want to answer, right, Adam?
I think it is. And engaging someone in emotion comes when they meet a moment often of conflict or moral dilemma. Now, you know, things are not black and white. Things are never straight on. And having that moral dilemma constantly within a story will kind of, almost in a problem solving way for the reader, will keep them engaged. So I think you have to have a kind of an end point that can be straight ahead of you, but the road there is not straight. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
That's a story I just gave you there, you see. There's an end point, but it's not a straight road. Yeah.
I don't know if this is useful, but last year my mentor was the head of marketing for Pan Macmillan. We got to talk on a similar topic like this, and her advice for anyone that was trying to get a book published, and she would always say it, when someone is looking at a book to buy it, the first thing they will look at is the cover. Yes, we say don't judge a book by its cover, but everyone does. Then everyone reads the blurb and everyone reads the first page, and if they're not interested, they won't continue reading after the first page. And that advice has stuck with me ever since. So anytime I write any piece of creative writing, my opening, whatever, whether it's a chapter, sentence, whatever, has to be really, really strong to grab the reader's attention.
Absolutely, yeah. I've heard the same thing, and I've experienced the same thing. I'll give, I used to have a 50-page rule. Now I have a 5-page rule. If I can't get engaged within 5 pages, I stop, because time is, you can't get it back. So especially the first couple of paragraphs have to be engaging. And I've recently been looking at book covers more critically, because they also draw people. readers to your product.
I mean,
cynically, I say that.
I mean, the great Stephen King, you have to get the reader in the first line with the hook, and that what if question. He kind of poses that almost in his first sentence to hook the reader with a crazy what if. And I guess, Kadisha, in copywriting and advertising, you know, the quicker you can get the hook into the reader, because the reader is a fish, the quicker, the sooner you eat, I guess. I don't know. I'm overworking another story there. So Scylla's got a good question. When you are creating your stories, I guess cynically in business, or even as a writer of genre fiction, who's kind of using particular tricks, do you have a set audience in mind when you start? And then there's a follow-up question in the chat from Scylla. How do you motivate yourself to write, and do you turn off your political views as you are writing? Are you almost channeling the cosmos and not interfering? I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to answer this first. Do I turn off my political views? No, I do not. In fact, majority of the time, they play the biggest role in how I come up with my ideas. So the whole Nancy idea, one of the main reasons I'm doing it is fine. I wanted I don't want to call it Tim Burton is gothic, but I wouldn't call what I'm doing gothic. But I wanted a Tim Burton-esque type of film that represented me, fine. But at the same time, Neil Gaiman wrote a spin-off on a Nancy called The Nancy Boys, and it honestly annoyed me that of everyone that could have rewrote those stories, it was Neil Gaiman. So I had that in mind when I was thinking, because I read that book, I even watched the show on Amazon, and it was nothing like the Anansi fairy tales that I was told growing up. So yeah, I used my political views there, where there was an argument we was having where it's like, should white people be telling people of color's stories? And in that scenario, I just really felt like, no, he shouldn't have. So I do definitely use my political views as like my start for writing anything. Yeah.
Well, taking Stephen King's example, and he wrote a great book on writing fiction, and he doesn't format his stories. He just sits down, he plays Metallica and other heavy metal rock in his study up there in Maine, and writes. And he just writes, and he knows the first draft is going to be terrible, but he just writes. I've attempted to do that, but for me, I need to start with the research and the world and the characters, and then I do some research. I look for something interesting. The goal, of course, is to whether it's in business or it's in storytelling for entertainment, fiction writing, is to influence your audience, to change their current attitudes or expand their world. And with regard to politics, in business, I'm very agnostic. In my writing, I tend to advocate for environmental interests, for fight against racist prejudices. I don't personally believe in race. I think it's a construct. I mean, these are important things to me to show rather than tell in my fiction.
Now, when it comes to showing, we've got an odd audience member here, Selene. Now, Selene's an interior designer and has to create narratives through space. And do you want to say something, Selene, on that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Actually, I'm in the creative industry in a different aspect, actually. As Ed said, I am studying interior design. But stories are really important for us as well, because we have to make spaces believable. and people's experience is very, very important. So we have to touch people's emotions. We can't just say, I designed it because I like it. You have to tell a story. You have to have a design concept, and you have to have a story behind, and you have to design every structure in this place according to this story. So obviously in this design process, the key is research. So we can get inspired from lots of things. For example, in my last project, I designed an Japanese exhibition space, and so we inspired from, of course, Japanese architecture. But when we are designing the item, so we have to take the narrative parts of the item, and when I am coming up with designer statement, so I was telling my story accordingly. Storytelling and touching people in this respect and making a correlation between your design and what you are trying to achieve with this design is a key. So to make your space, to make your building, whatever, believable actually. So I'm not sure if I could answer your question, Adam, but storytelling is really, really key part. And whenever I finish my design, I come up with designer statement and what I am really trying to achieve. For example, as said, I did a Japanese architecture. I got inspired from Japanese architecture. I designed an exhibition space, and my starting point was just a quote that I saw at a Japanese house. It was about ceiling, it was about eaves, and it was about nature, which was my starting point. And then I brought the Japanese garden concept into my design, the narrative part, not literally, but just taking bits and pieces from Japanese garden. And my story was just going back to roots, actually. Human beings going back to roots, because we are very cruel to nature, we are very harsh, and we are destroying everything. So it was a bit about going back to our roots by while designing this Japanese garden concept. So
it sounds like it's about the message rather than the target audience. So I guess in answer to your question, Ezra, about do you start with the target audience? I don't. I mean, I usually have things to say when I write, but it's about the message that I just want to tell the world.
The message.
And the problems that I often see with the world, that you can explore the problem through a story, but no, I don't really start with a target audience. What about you, Gabrielle and Kadisha? Do you cynically have a target audience in mind?
Oh, you can go this one.
Well, okay. Well, I do actually. I'd like to have people read my stories, so I do have a target audience in mind. I like to be successful as a writer. I don't want to just write and have them be words on a page. So yes, I do have a target audience in mind, and they're so far it's been men 18 to 70. Yeah, a lot of those guys out there.
I think for me, and this sounds like quite selfish almost. But when I do write creative stories, I don't necessarily write them for other people. I write them for me, in the sense of if I feel like I'm like so growing up for me, I really loved everything like I want to call it gothic, but it's not really gothic. So like the Addams Family, stuff like that. Until, like I said, I got to the age where I realized, 1 second, why am I not being represented? And that's when I was like, okay, well, fine, I'm going to write this for me. And if someone else likes it and someone else likes it, that's just like fortunate. But I don't really have like a target audience in mind. It's just to satisfy me in some kind of way, I guess.
So I guess then our answer is there are different types of story with different genesis, different objectives.
Absolutely. If you're a creative writer in a business, you're writing stories to engage customers, you have an objective. If you're in the marketing department of a business, you've got to bring attention to your product or services, and you have to do that in a manner that is not just information. Information alone doesn't motivate people. It's got to engage. They have to be well-designed stories that engage emotions and caring. There's a great one that's circulating now here in Southern California. A corporate leasing company leases space to companies, and leasing is very big because there's some tax advantages to it. And their phrase is, "Life is a lease. Live it well." Makes you think. We don't own anything. As Crocodile Dundee told his girlfriend, we're like fleas on a dog. We don't own the dog.
That's crazy.
Something to think about.
I'll be stuck in my head for eternity. Life is a lease. That's great.
Okay, I'd better hand back to Claudia to wrap up, because sadly our time is coming to a close.
So thank you so much, Kadisha and Gabriel, for this beautiful kind of, way of just expressing kind of yourselves and your views on this topic. And it was really helpful to understand some things that you wouldn't even think, because stories are everywhere. So I think you really made that clear. And thank you very much for that. And thank you to the audience for also participating. So yeah, again, thank you for attending. Thanks.